Picture the President of the United States watching American military assets taking fire in the Middle East and then picking up the phone to ask the one country he has spent his entire term fiercely battling to bail him out.
Right, to literally ask for their war
It's
chest.
exactly. He is actively urging China to send its military ships to the Gulf to help the U.S. So, welcome to the deep dive. You might be sitting there thinking this sounds like a geopolitical fever dream, but our mission today is to pull apart this entirely unprecedented reality.
It really is unprecedented. I mean, we are watching the global hegemon expressly ask its primary challenger for military assistance.
In the most combustible region on the planet. Okay, let's unpack this. Because it's honestly like accidentally setting your own house on fire, realizing the flames are completely out of control.
And then running across the street to ask your biggest rival to bring their garden hose to put it out.
Yes, it makes zero sense on the surface.
Well, what's fascinating here is that this bizarre scenario perfectly encapsulates how the traditional rules of great power rivalry are just breaking down in real time.
Breaking down how?
Well, we aren't looking at a simple Cold War binary anymore. We're looking at a deeply interconnected world where rivalries and dependencies overlap.
Wow.
It forces leaders into these seemingly impossible corners.
Right.
And this single request, I mean, it exposes profound American vulnerabilities while highlighting the exact nature of Beijing's rising leverage.
So the house fire didn't just start on its own, right?
Uh-huh.
We need to look at the inciting incident here.
Yeah, the trigger.
The context for you, the listener, is the February 28th U.S. military strike on Iran. Ever since that specific trigger, the conflict has been escalating rapidly.
Very rapidly.
And it is abundantly clear that Trump is desperately looking for an exit strategy. He wants to avoid a sprawling, endless regional war.
Which nobody wants.
Right. And his specific request to Beijing was for them to send minesweepers to the Strait of Hormuz. So what does this all mean for the U.S.-China dynamic? Because you have a U.S. president whose entire political brand is built on being combative with China.
His whole platform, yeah.
And now he suddenly needs their naval assets.
Irony is staggering. But, when you look at it from Beijing's perspective, they have absolutely no intention of fulfilling this request.
Not at all.
None. Our sources highlight a pivotal, basically centuries-old strategic principle that explains their calculus here. Simply put, why interrupt your enemy while he is making a mistake?
Ah, the classic Napoleon rule. Never get in the way of an opponent in the middle of a blunder.
Exactly. And we have a brilliant historical parallel from the source material to ground this. Think back to George W. Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003.
Oh, right.
At the time, Washington viewed that entirely through the lens of the war on terror. But mechanically speaking, the U.S. military getting bogged down in Iraq for years was a massive geopolitical windfall for China.
Because we were distracted.
Heavily distracted. While the United States was spending trillions of dollars and draining its political capital on counterinsurgency in the desert, China was given this crucial decade-long window.
Wow.
They used that time, completely free from America's undivided attention, to accelerate their economic dominance, build out the Belt and Road Initiative, and modernize their own military.
So an American ground war in Iran could offer Beijing that exact same gift all over again.
It could actually be significantly more beneficial today. I mean, it is one thing for China to slowly chip away at American diplomatic or economic edges.
Right.
It is quite another to just sit back and watch the U.S. willingly ensnare itself in a conflict that isolates Washington from its allies and depletes its naval readiness.
Like a trap.
Yeah, the Middle East acts like a black hole for American military resources. The closer you get to the event horizon, the harder it is to pull your assets out.
And the worse things go for Trump in the Gulf, the more tempted he might be to take extreme risks.
Exactly. And China doesn't need to put its own sailors in the line of fire to benefit from that chaos. They just have to watch the black hole pull the U.S. in.
But that brings us to the underlying logic of the pitch. Because you might be thinking, if a refusal from Beijing was so incredibly obvious, why would Trump even bother picking up the phone?
Right. Why even ask?
Yeah. But it turns out there is undeniable mathematical logic behind the request. And it basically comes down to a massive imbalance in global oil reliance.
The economic arithmetic here is stark. Roughly half of all of China's oil imports travel right through the Strait of Hormuz.
Half.
Half. It is a 21-mile-wide choke point that serves as the absolute lifeline of their energy infrastructure. By contrast, the United States gets almost nothing from that specific maritime route anymore.
Right, thanks to the shale revolution and domestic fracking over the last decade, the U.S. is largely insulated from Middle Eastern supply shocks.
Which changes the game completely.
So structurally, it is actually China that has the far greater long-term stake in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open and stable, not the U.S.
Yeah, the American military has essentially spent the last few decades securing the very maritime routes that fuel the Chinese economy.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
If you are sitting in Beijing and you rely so heavily on that oil flowing through the strait, shouldn't you want to step in? I mean, shouldn't China be eager to send those minesweepers to protect their own factories from going dark?
It makes logical sense on paper.
Right, because just a few years ago, in 2023, Joe Biden was publicly commending China for brokering a diplomatic rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Washington really thought Beijing was finally taking an active, stabilizing role in the region.
That was certainly the prevailing hope back then. The expectation was that China's days of free riding on U.S. maritime security were coming to an end.
They have to step up.
Exactly. If Beijing wanted to be recognized as a global superpower, they needed to start bearing the costs of global security, especially where their own economic lifelines were vulnerable.
But something changed.
The operational environment on the water has fundamentally changed since 2023. We are now dealing with a drone-infested Middle East.
The asymmetry of drone warfare.
Exactly the issue. The proliferation of cheap, highly lethal loitering munitions has entirely changed the risk calculus for naval operations.
Because it's so cheap for the enemy.
Right. You have a scenario where a $20,000 drone can cripple a highly sophisticated $500 million minesweeper.
Wow. The math is just brutal there.
Beijing has looked at the board and run the numbers. They calculated that the mechanical risks of putting their own naval assets into an environment where swarm tactics can overwhelm traditional defenses, it just far outweighs the rewards.
So they'd rather just suffer the economic damage.
Pretty much. Even though they dread economic instability and the sting of oil shocks, they are perfectly content to play the onlooker. They will absorb a temporary economic hit from higher oil prices to let the United States shoulder the physical danger.
And the immense financial burden of swatting down those cheap drones with multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles.
Exactly.
But the U.S. can't just pressure China militarily here to force their hand, because their hands are tied by a completely separate war they've been fighting for over a year.
The economic one.
Right. These two theaters are crashing into each other. Let's trace the timeline of that economic conflict, because it really explains why relations are so frigid right now.
It's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
So last April, Trump launched a massive economic offensive against China. He hit his biggest Liberation Day target with eye-watering tariffs, reaching as high as 145%.
That is an astronomical figure. Tariffs at that level aren't just about protecting domestic industries. They're designed to completely fracture integrated supply chains.
To just break the system.
Yeah, to inflict maximum punitive damage on the Chinese export market.
But China didn't just take it. They retaliated with a devastating weapon of their own.
The rare earths embargo.
Exactly. They choked off the critical minerals required to manufacture almost every piece of advanced technology we rely on today.
We are talking about everything from the smartphone in your pocket to the very F-35 fighter jets and precision missiles being used in the Middle East right now.
It's wild to think about.
And the mechanism of that embargo is what makes it so lethal. It's not just that China has a lot of rare earth elements in the ground.
Right, because the U.S. has mines, too.
Right, but China holds a near-total monopoly on the highly complex, environmentally toxic chemical refining processes required to make those minerals usable.
So even when the U.S. mines its own rare earths, it often has to ship the raw material back to China for processing.
Exactly. You cannot rebuild that kind of heavy industrial refining capacity overnight. It takes years.
So it was a heavyweight economic brawl. The 145% tariffs versus the rare earths stranglehold.
A total standoff.
The friction got so intense that both sides realized they were burning down their own economies, so a truce was finally reached last October.
Which was a relief for global markets.
And that truce was supposed to clear the air and pave the way for a massive, high-stakes summit in Beijing.
A summit scheduled for March 31st to April 2nd. Right at the Forbidden City.
The primary goal being to stabilize U.S.-China relations and map out a sustainable economic coexistence.
But then on Monday, Trump officially postponed it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Just look at the raw political optics of the situation. Visualize it for a second.
It's quite the image.
Trump could not possibly stand on a podium at the Imperial Palace, smiling and shaking hands with top Chinese officials, while an American war with Iran is raging and American troops are actively in harm's way.
Oh, absolutely not.
The visual of a U.S. president heading into the Forbidden City with what amounts to a begging bowl to ask for naval help is simply too lurid.
It projects a level of vulnerability that is completely unacceptable for any commander-in-chief, let alone one whose entire political persona is predicated on projecting strength and dominance over Beijing.
So what was his excuse for delaying?
Well, Trump's publicly stated reason for postponing the summit is very specific. He claimed in an interview that he delayed it because China's help in the Gulf is needed before they meet.
Framing it as a hard precondition.
A precondition he knows they will never meet. I mean, since Trump is fully aware that there's scant chance China will insert its personnel into the world's most lethal choke point, just to do him a favor.
We have to view this stated excuse through the lens of political theater.
It is a face-saving delay. He cannot go to Beijing looking weak, and he cannot force them to send the minesweepers. The only move left on his board is to cancel the meeting entirely and blame the delay on their lack of cooperation.
Which leaves the entire geopolitical landscape in a state of suspended animation. China remains entirely immune to Trump's usual leverage because of that rare earth processing monopoly.
They hold the cards there.
So where does the United States turn for help when the primary rival says no? You turn to your traditional friends. You turn to NATO and specifically to partners like Britain.
This is where the cascading structural effects of this unadvised war really start to show their teeth.
Trump is attempting to cajole the NATO alliance into stepping up and sending military support to the Gulf. But he has made it legally and politically impossible for them to say yes.
Consider the irony for a second here. Trump is a president famously critical of NATO's rules and obligations. Now, he is being thwarted by the exact letter of those rules.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, the European allies are pointing to two fundamental realities. First, they were not consulted.
At all.
At all. The February 28th strike on Iran was a unilateral American action. You cannot blindside your international partners with a massive military escalation, launch an unadvised war, and then demand they share the bloody consequences.
Right. And the second reality.
The second reality is the actual legal charter of the alliance itself. NATO is fundamentally a self-defense pact. Article 5 dictates that an armed attack against one member is considered an attack against them all.
Which was invoked only once, right? After 9/11.
Exactly, to help the United States. But Article 5 does not obligate member nations to join a unilateral, gratuitous attack initiated by one member against a third party.
It's like if a member state walks into a bar and throws the first punch, the rest of the group isn't legally bound to jump in and start a massive bar fight.
That is a perfect analogy. The European capitals are looking at this crisis and concluding that it is entirely of Washington's own making. It destabilizes global energy markets, which hurts Europe disproportionately, and it draws focus away from Europe's own existential security threats.
But Trump does not take no for an answer lightly. The profound difference between his dynamic with China and his dynamic with Europe is that he actually possesses the retaliatory levers to inflict severe, immediate pain on the European continent.
And the lengths he's willing to go to punish his own allies for citing NATO's legal charter are staggering.
Let's get into that because the punitive measures detailed in our sources are deeply alarming. They actively dismantle the foundational security architecture of the West.
We need to look at the mechanics of these four specific retaliatory actions to understand the damage being done here. First, Trump suspended oil sanctions on Russia.
Let's really detail why that hurts. Suspending those sanctions immediately boosts Vladimir Putin's war chest. It allows Russian energy to flow more freely, generating the capital Moscow needs to sustain its military operations.
He is actively enriching Europe's primary existential threat, simply to punish Brussels for not joining him in the Middle East.
That's the first one. What's the second?
Second, he has ensured that far fewer Patriot missile defense systems are available for Ukraine.
Which are crucial right now.
The Patriot systems are the critical umbrella protecting Ukrainian cities and infrastructure from Russian ballistic missiles. By reducing their availability, he mechanically leaves Ukrainian airspace, and by extension, the eastern flank of European security, incredibly vulnerable to sustained bombardment.
Wow. And the third measure?
Third, he's actively withholding critical intelligence from Ukraine.
Which blinds their early warning system.
Exactly. It degrades their ability to counter Russian troop movements, directly jeopardizing the European security effort.
And fourth, he is expanding his leverage beyond the European continent to punish Britain specifically. He threatened to veto Britain's delicate diplomatic deal with Mauritius regarding the strategic military base on Diego Garcia.
For those who might not track Indian Ocean geopolitics, Diego Garcia is a highly classified, incredibly vital military atoll.
It is critical for staging long-range bombers and submarines.
Right. And the UK has been locked in a complex sovereignty dispute with Mauritius over the territory.
Threatening to veto the UK's negotiated settlement just pulls the rug out from under London's global strategic footprint. It is pure geopolitical sabotage against one of America's closest allies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the profound trap Trump has built for his own administration.
A trap of his own making.
Yeah. He initiated a military conflict that rapidly outpaced his expectations and resources. He attempted to get his primary rival, China, to bail him out. But China is shielded by their rare earths monopoly and their willingness to just wait out the chaos.
Because he cannot force Beijing's hand, all of his geopolitical frustration is being redirected toward Europe.
The traditional allies are taking the brunt of his anger, even as it actively undermines American security interests in the long run.
As someone reading through these sources, the calculated sacrifice of alliances is hard to overstate. I mean, there is clear evidence that Russian and Iranian interests are aligning, with Putin actively helping Iran target U.S. military assets.
Yes.
Yet Trump is suspending sanctions on Russia, effectively helping Putin to punish Europe for not helping him fight Iran. He is literally tearing down the foundational walls of the house just to spite the roommates.
Which leaves the entire geopolitical order in a deeply precarious state. We have an indefinitely delayed superpower summit with China.
We have a furious, alienated, and actively punished European alliance.
And we have a spiraling war in the Middle East that shows no signs of wrapping up cleanly.
The initial hope inside the administration for a quick surgical strike and a rapid resolution has completely evaporated.
2 weeks is famously a long time in the eyes of any U.S. president. The administration is now being forced to confront the harsh reality of their actions.
They have to adjust their entire operational mindset to prepare for a long, grueling, and heavily resource-intensive war in the Gulf.
A war they will have to fight without the help of their rivals and having actively alienated their closest friends.
It was a remarkably isolated position for the United States to find itself in on the world stage.
And it is a remarkably comfortable, advantageous position for Beijing to sit back and watch unfold.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the geopolitical earthquake of 2026. We've unpacked the astonishing request for Chinese naval aid, the mechanics of the rare earths economic standoff, and the devastating ripple effects currently tearing at the fabric of traditional Western alliances.
It serves as a stark reminder of how quickly the global chessboard can tilt against you when a single, unilateral military action spirals beyond your control.
Before you go, we want to leave you with one final, lingering question to turn over in your mind. We've talked about China's strategy of simply letting an opponent make a mistake, but think about the long-term endgame here.
The big picture.
Right. If China successfully sits back, playing the onlooker, and lets a prolonged, grueling conflict in the Middle East drain American military readiness and political capital, how permanently will this shift the global balance of power?
Especially when you consider that the United States is still at a massive disadvantage regarding the refining and control of those critical rare earth elements that will power the next century of technology.
Exactly. If America gets itself bogged down in the desert for another decade, does China just quietly win the 21st century without ever firing a single shot? Something to think about.
Yeah.
Until next time.